Hello, and welcome back to our VCF 9.1 adoption series. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're if you've attended the other sessions, welcome back. We're here today to continue our discussion of VCF 9.1. Let's go ahead and jump right in. We got a lot of great content for you today, but just to recap, so this is the fourth of 5 initial sessions that we have planned. We kicked this off on July 15th, and if you missed any of these, don't worry. Recordings are available. You can go back and watch these. If you've been with us throughout, just kind of a refresher here. Remember, we started with a quick overview of designing a VCF 9.1 private cloud. We went into a discussion on what a VCF fleet is, what a VCF instance is. We talked about design considerations, scaling, latency, and we got a little bit into how to upgrade and discussed a little bit about upgrades. We then moved over and we went through a deployment, and this was hands-on. We went into the VCF installer. We led everything through a demo and went through and we did a new, fresh deployment of VCF 9.1 as a group, and we went through that and looked at the considerations there. And then last week, we followed that up with an overview of workload domains. Went in, we showed how to add host or commission host. We went in and showed how to create workload domains, how to import workload domains, and we even looked at how to scale workload domains by adding some host to an existing cluster. And that brings us up to today, where we're going to continue our discussion of VCF 9.1. And today we're going to focus on VCF operations. So once you stood up your private cloud, we have this centralized control plane where we're going to go in and monitor the health, capacity, and basically monitor and manage our private cloud. And that interface is VCF operations. And to help us in our discussion of VCF operations, I'm going to have 3 of my colleagues join me. I'm going to have Abhijit Timble, Kelsey Lemon, and Andrew Firth, and they're each going to take over in their respective areas of expertise and talk to us about things like, how do I set up VCF operations after I've deployed? What are the considerations? What do I need to do? How do I set up the costing? And how do I do capacity planning? And then how do we get into fleet management? How do we manage certificates and passwords? And how do we take this operations tool and how do we get the most out of it? And that's what we're going to focus on right now. And so again, we do have experts available in the Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to ask those. I'm going to jump ahead here. Remember that these are all going to be live demo-led presentations. We're doing everything live using lab environments to help give you the look and feel that you can expect in your own environment. And again, we do have those experts standing by in the Q&A. So ask those questions, put those in there. We'll do our best to answer them. Just a reminder, though, that the expertise that we have compiled here for today's session is expertise on VCF operations. So if you ask questions that are maybe outside of this particular area, we may not have those answers. So try and keep the questions relevant to today's topic. And then, of course, all sessions are recorded. So if you need to leave early or if you missed some of the earlier sessions, we'll be posting a link where you can get access to the recordings. They're available on the Cloud Foundation webinar series YouTube playlist. And you can go back and you can watch any of the previous sessions as well. And then remember, just in case you don't make it to the end, we'll be having another session next week where we'll go over the cloud consumption with VCF automation. And we'll have more experts brought in who will be able to go through and show us how to set up VCF automation, how to set up those organizations and those blueprints, and how to go in and get the most out of that in order to consume the private cloud that we're building. And so with that, I'm now going to introduce Abhijit Timble, and I'm going to hand off to him and let him get us started, and then we'll go from there. So I'll see you guys in the Q&A. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle, for the introduction. So let me share my screen here. Okay. All right. So managing a private cloud infrastructure at scale requires precise monitoring, streamlined fleet governance, and powerful proactive troubleshooting. So this is where we use VCF operations to monitor and optimize the compute, storage, and network of your VCF platform. So VCF operations centers around the 4 main pillars to run private cloud infrastructure, that is build, manage, operate, and protect. And now these 4 operation aspects transform infrastructure management into a resilient, automated private cloud platform that adapts to enterprise demands. So in previous sessions, we saw Kyle covering the build portion. So in today's session, we will focus mostly on the operating the private cloud, where VCF operations provides health and diagnostics visibility into your VCF cloud using real-time metrics. Application operations to help ensure your critical applications like your traditional applications or modern applications running on VMware Kubernetes service are running at optimal efficiency. And then infrastructure operations to monitor and troubleshoot the components that make up the VCF cloud, including compute, storage, and networking. And then we'll cover the manage section where VCF operations helps in maintaining centralized control over single sign-on, licensing, certificates, and passwords. So VCF operations also helps reduce operational cost with cost visibility and showback chargeback capabilities, allowing IT teams to focus on maximizing resource capacity of the infrastructure. So in previous sessions, we saw Kyle and Jed going through different VCF fleet designs that we can use to deploy VCF. So in today's lab, we have a greenfield deployment with a small footprint with a single fleet containing one VCF instance with one management domain and one workload domain. So this includes all the management components like your VCF operations, VCF automation, and all the day-end components have been already installed like logs, real-time metrics, and operations for networks. So we will use this slide now as a guide to walk you through the entire process of configuring and optimizing VCF operations. So the first step is to log into VCF operations and verify if the metrics and data are showing up. So let me log into a live environment here. So we are in the VCF installer where we see the VCF installation is complete. Its deployment is done and it shows the URL to log into VCF operations along with the credentials. So on clicking, it will take us to the VCF operations product user interface. Now, the best part is that most of the adapters like your VCF management pack, they are all auto-configured for the greenfield deployment, which means it enables VCF operations to collect metrics, data, and alerts. So this helps simplifies a lot of our admin task, right? So here, once you're logged into the product homepage, we see the overview section here. We see a summary of all the VMware Cloud accounts monitored in VCF operations. We can see the inventory here. So the inventory section basically covers showing the VCF domain, data centers, cluster, ESX host. We also see the findings, right? So diagnostics findings, basically which highlighting security risk based on advisories like CVEs and VMCAs. Certificate visibility, again, we can view and manage certificates for all VCF core and management components. We're also able to see the overall capacity usage in terms of CPU, memory, disk space per cluster. We can see capacity remaining and time remaining. We can also see some alerts which are showing up, the cost, and also we see a top object growth trend within your VMware Cloud infrastructure. So the yellow banner on top means that we are running the setup in 90 days eval mode. This is default interval, which gives enough buffer to the admins to properly license the environment. Now, under overview, we have dedicated sections for compute, storage, and network. So compute page will show all information related to compute inventory like ESX, the vCenters, the clusters configured. We can see the critical alerts specific to your compute. As we come below, we can see the cluster availability, like we can see the number of running hosts per individual clusters. We can see the hosts which are part of the clusters and its uptime. As we come below, we can see the trend of vCenter and ESX health issues over time. So here we are basically just verifying that the metrics and data are showing up correctly in VCF operations. Then we have a dedicated storage page, which provides all information in one place like visibility into active storage specific alerts, like all your critical and warning alerts. We can see capacity usage of your vCenter clusters and all the data stores that have been deployed in the VCF stack. So we can see the overall health scores, the different vCenter cluster types, and also the overall inventory. And then we get into the network section here. Again, this provides a complete network inventory view, okay? So you can see like we have complete visibility in your NSX deployments. We can show the number of NSX instances, the edge nodes, ESX host, VDS configured, the VPCs that have been configured, and so on. So one thing to note that it is asking us to enable the network flow collection on top, right? So this is something which we have to, it's not enabled by default. We have to enable by getting into the integrations, which we'll do later. And this is required to show the traffic analysis. So as we go through this page, we can see like we can get the overall NSX inventory. We can see the NSX age utilization, NSX host utilization. Traffic analysis will show up once we enable the network traffic flows. Yeah, so the inventory basically shows an overall summary of your VCF deployment. So here we see the tree tree-wise view. We can see the objects grouped by vSphere host and clusters. So this is the instance that we configured. This is the management domain. This is the workload domain. And we see the vCenter, management vCenter, the data center. As we expand further, we can see the host clusters here. And then we see the ESX host. So we're just verifying that metrics are showing up. We can see the inventory of the ESX host. We see the utilization metrics. Under metrics, we are able to see the topology, which looks great. And also the metrics are showing up. So it means data collection is happening correctly, right? So, and then next is on the dashboards. So dashboards are basically, these are like your out-of-the-box performance dashboards. And again, so VCF operations provides different sections, groups, dashboards, which are again aligned with different operational areas. Now, as we have deployed VCF, there is a separate VCF folder here where you can see all the VCF specific dashboards. So we can look at how the VCF management host performance are happening, right? So we can see like all the ESX hosts, which are part of the management domain. Similarly, there are other dashboards under VCF folder. We can look at the vCenter performance metrics, right? So you can see like the overall vCenter performance here. We can look at VCF workload host performances. So we are getting all these metrics out of the box. So this dashboard basically provide like a proactive insights before we start deploying any application workloads. So here we can see like that most of the monitoring is auto-enabled, which basically simplifies a lot of our admin task. All right, so let me go back to the deck here. So what we saw is we saw the overview page, we saw the inventory dashboards, right? So now let's look at configuring of logs and the flow collection. So for that, we will navigate to administration and integrations tab. So this is where we'll be able to see the VMware Cloud Foundation accounts that have been configured. So we can see like all the instance and the management and workload domains are in collecting state, which looks good. So we are just verifying that the endpoints are streaming data to VCF operations. So now let's click on the instance A. And here we'll see that most of the domains get auto-discovered when we add this account. And under the management domain, we can see like we are looking at different configurations for vCenter, vSAN, NSX, and service discovery. So under vCenter, what we see now is the log collection, right? So by default, you won't see this checkbox enabled. So we have to enable this in order to activate the log collection to collect vCenter events and alarms. So we'll go ahead and enable the logs collection, and also we'll enable the network flow collection. So we'll select the collector, which was deployed as part of the VCF installer. And this is your VCF operations for network collector. We'll also enable the network flow IPFix so that we start seeing NSX IPFix flows. Same thing, we'll do it for the NSX as well. We'll go to log collection, we enable logs. And again, we'll also enable the network flows and enable the IPFix collection. So we'll do it for both the domains and click save. Now, this is going to take some time. So by the time it saves the configuration, let me move to the next step here. So this is the live setup. So by the time the configuration gets saved, we can look at the collection status. So the collection status basically provides an overview of the data being collected at different cluster level within your VCF operations. So you can see the, okay, here. Yeah, so we can see the different adapters sending metrics and records to the cloud proxy, and we can quickly identify if there is any issue with the collection. So you can see the number of objects and metrics being sent to VCF operations. All right, so moving back to the slide here. So we have configured logs, we have configured the network flow collection. Now let's look at the global settings. So now that the collection status is healthy, we'll try to optimize and fine tune some of the data collections. We'll properly set the retention policies to basically ensure that data is available for reporting. So for that, we get into administration and global settings page. So the global settings page determines how VCF operations retains the data, keeps connection sessions open. So these are the system settings that will affect all the users. Like for under data retention, so for the real-time metrics, I would like to save it for 20 days. And this is the real-time metrics data. Under user access, I will enable the concurrent UI login and save here. And similarly, for the system settings, I will go and change the session inactive timeout to 30 minutes instead of 15 minutes. Now, again, there are also other configurations that are available, but I've just picked these three settings that would like to make the change. Okay, so we have done with the global settings configurations. Now let's look at policies and configurations. So configuration page, which you'll find under administration. So now this page is where you define your policies. These are the set of rules that you define for VCF operations you to use to analyze and display information about the objects in your environment. So under configuration, we'll select the policy definitions here. So here you see a different policies here. We'll go with the default policy. You always pick the default policy. The D basically indicates that this is the active policy. And this is where you determine how you want VCF operations to monitor your objects and how to notify the problems. So let me go to edit policy here. So you see alert section. So these are all the default alert definitions that are part of this policy. So now what we basically do is like we keep it as it is and we'll review the triggered alerts to take actions and then look at fine tuning these opportunities. Because the end goal is we want to make sure all the alerts are actionable alerts. So basically we'll review the alerts on regular basis, we'll take actions, we'll disable unwanted alert definitions, and then keep only actionable alerts. And this is all customizable based on every organization and the team requirements. Okay, so put the police definition here. So under policies, I'll go and make one change where that's real-time metrics. I want to make sure I enable the 2 seconds high resolution metrics for the ESX. And I'll activate and click save. So under configurations, then I'll get into the logs section here.
Hey,
and also we want to, yeah.
There's been a couple of questions about logs and the flows, formerly known as Log Insight and Verni. Can you just take a minute real quick and just show how under the build tab, how we add logs and ops for networks so that they know where those features have been moved to in VCF 9.1?
Yeah. So under build section, if we go to life cycle, so this is where you'll see all the components that have been installed. Like you'll see the VCF operations here. And again, you can install it from here. So right now we have deployed all these components, but you will be able to manage all these components from here. Like for example, log management, right? So clicking here, it will show me that the different specific version it is running, the status, the FQTN. And again, you will be able to scale it up, increase storage size, generate support bundles for any troubleshooting scenarios, stop, restart the service, and so on. So one thing is in 9.1, yeah. So there is no separate UI for log management because everything is now combined within VCF operations.
Right. All right, great. So hopefully that answers the question. So both logs and the ops for networks is now integrated in VCF operations, and under this build tab, VCF management is where we go to enable and activate. So thanks. I just thought it'd be good if you could answer that real quick. So let you get back with your demo.
Yeah. So under configurations for the log management, again, we want to make sure we have set the retention policies for the logs so that we do by getting into the log processing, log partitioning. Now, if you see here, like there are two partitions, and by default, the retention period is set to forever, right? So basically what will happen is these logs are kept indefinitely. So we want to make sure we set a specific retention period for these logs. So we go here, we can define a retention period, say 90 days, right? And if you want, we can also enable the archival. So archival is another option if you want to export logs for long terms, like 2 years, 3 years down the line. And you can also configure S3 or an NFS bucket to do that. Advantage is it will help optimize your storage cost and also improve the query performances times. Okay. So this is where you set the retention periods for the logs. So I'm going to update this. Okay, I don't need the archival here. Right. So now we have set the retention period for the audit records. Similarly, you can do it for the other ones. And let me switch to the full another environment here. So once we have configured the logs retention, we can also customize the log collection. Like for example, here you can see all the VCF components which are sending logs. So we can see these are the two vCenters. One is the management vCenter, workload vCenters. We can see that status is enabled. We also have additional options now. We can go edit here and I can say that, okay, I want to enable vCenter log collection. I want to enable log levels at warning and above, or maybe I want to see all the error logs. I want to just enable authentication and security specific logs. I can do it from here. So you have additional configurations now available through the settings page. Similarly, you can do it for the ESX nodes. You can edit this log collection and also for the vSphere supervisor collection as well. Okay. Like log levels, you can increase to warnings and above and so on. Okay. So this is where you can configure the logs. Similarly, you can manage all the log agents from here. So as I said, like 9.1, there is no separate UI for login side. So everything, all the capabilities are now integrated within VCF operations. And you will see all the configurations for logs under this configurations page. So here you can manage all the log agents for your components. And by default, all the VCF components has log agents enabled. And then we have the integrated load balancer. Again, we can set virtual IPs for load balancing. Basically, you can segregate the tenants based on virtual IP addresses. So now this VCF operations is deployed. We also want to make sure that it remains healthy and can also scale up to future demands, right? It can scale up to the new workloads that are getting deployed in VCF. So I also want to bring up some of the tools to your attention. So we use these tools in planning and preparations and use this as a standard guide to ensure your VCF operations deployment always remains healthy. So we'll start with the dashboards. So on the dashboards, if you search for VCF operations, so you see a health dashboard, right? So this is a good starting point to monitor the health of your overall VCF operations. You can see the cluster health state. You can see the data nodes that have been configured. You can see the overall health of your nodes here. And also below it will show the details of the selected objects and the overall topology view as well. Similarly, we also have a dedicated dashboard for the log management. So you want to make sure we monitor the log management service properly. So you can do it by getting into this dashboard. You can see the ingestion rates for your logs. You can see the current event ingestions. And again, there are multiple metrics available in terms of your logs consumption. So this is one way of monitoring your logs and VCF operations. Another thing is we also want to make sure we properly plan and size the VCF operations and also the log management cluster to handle the future growth. So for that, we use this VCF operations sizing tool. So again, so we have a new interface for 9.1. So we click here. For example, say suppose we are adding a new workload domain, right, after 6 months down the line, and that will have like around say 20 ESX host, and we'll have log retention policy set to 180 days. Right? So this tool will provide you an estimate of what additional nodes are required to scale up your VCF operations as well as your log management cluster. So in this case, you can see, right, we'll need an additional extra small node, right? And it will show the configurations required to build this node. Similarly, if you go to log management, it will tell you how many replicas are required to scale up to handle this additional events per seconds and the total storage and so on. Okay, so this is a helpful tool to scale up or manage your VCF operations sizing. And then also I want to bring up one more tool, that is the VMware configuration maximums. This is like the officially supported configuration maximum limits for VMware products. These limits basically define the maximum values that VMware has tested and validated to ensure your reliable performance and support. So in this case, like say, suppose you want to deploy log management with medium scale, right? So can you find out like what is the configuration, what is the spec, right? How much IOPS it supports, how much events per second it will support, the configurations, log ingestion rate, and so on. So again, a useful tool to make sure you properly size your ops and logs and uh, instances. Yeah. Okay, so let me go back to the deck here. So we looked at the policies, we looked at configurations, we looked at planning tools. Now we have enabled metrics, logs, and flows. Now let's verify that the metrics, logs, and flows are showing up, right? So for that, we'll go back to VCF operations. So Workbench, so you want, in order to access the real-time metrics, we usually go to Workbench. So we select one of the instance here under real-time analysis. We'll be able to see the real-time metrics. Like you can see, we can just filter by VMs here. So it will show VMs within your cluster. As you zoom out, you can see like each, you can see like it's getting collected at 20-second duration, right? So this is how we can confirm that the real-time metrics are showing up. Same thing for the metrics. So again, metrics are basically helps you to, you can run your own custom queries and to view the metrics. Like this is one of the custom query which we built to look at CPU utilization of the host system. And yeah, if you click, you'll be able to see the overall CPU usage for your ESX host. So this is another way of quickly finding metrics using this metrics tab. And then we have the logs, so where you can analyze the logs. So you also can confirm that it is sending. We want to find out like which VCF components are sending logs. So you can do it by searching for the SD comp ID. This is one of the field which got added in 9.1. So you can just search by STCOM ID and apply. So this will show you a breakup of all the VCF components sending logs to your logs system. Okay. So this is another way of finding that, hey, which logs, which components are sending logs to my instance. And then we have the network flows. Again, this is where you get visibility into network traffic patterns. So if you click on analyze, it will show you, it will show top talkers, the busiest flow top talkers by flow volume, session count, uh, flow count, and traffic rate. You can again filter it by layer 2 network or by subnet, right? And again, so you can also click on any specific flow here. You can see the source VM talking to destination VM. You can see the traffic rate details here, and all the vSphere properties are here. And if you click on this, it will show you the logical network path, like the path a VM takes to talk from source to destination. So in this case, you can see like we have two ESX servers. This is your source VM, and this is your distributed port group from which it is talking to your destination VM. So this is how we can get the end-to-end logical network path visibility. All right, so moving next, we'll look at VCF health. So we see that, okay, the instance looks good. All the domain configurations looks good. The status looks good. All the ESX hosts are in healthy state, and all the components look healthy. So with that, let me go back to the slide deck here. Yeah, so we looked at how we verified the metrics, logs, and flows. We enabled uh, uh, network flows. We also checked the VCF health, right? So this covers the section around the operate for VCF operations.
So
And yeah,
Abhijit,
so
before
yeah,
you go, there's been some questions about can you forward logs to outside systems? And if so, how would
yes.
you do that?
Yes, to forward the logs, basically you get into administration, configurations, and so there is a section called log forwarding. So this is where you can send it to a third-party tool like over syslog or raw, right? So you have these options to forward the logs to any third-party instance.
Okay,
And
great.
again, you
Thanks.
have, you have the filtering capabilities here. Like you want to make sure you send only specific logs, not everything, right? So you can do it by through this controlling by filtering section. Yep.
Great.
Okay, so with that, I'll hand it over to Kelsey to get the capacity and cost configurations done for VCF operations. So over to you, Kelsey.
Awesome. Thanks, Abhijit. So again, hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Sulem. I'm a technical marketing manager for the VCS division here. And I'm here today to talk about cost and capacity, right? And as someone who's done cost and pricing configurations, a few times, what I thought I'd do today is actually start by showing you what a fully configured environment looks like, and then sort of walk backwards from there, right? And so with that said, let's just show what the end game, what we're trying to achieve in this configuration process looks like, right? And so here we've got this fully, stood up environment here, and I'm just going to scroll down. I'm just going to show you what's happening here. As you can see here, we've got this environment, we've got cost already configured. We're seeing our total cost of ownership, we're seeing realized savings, we're seeing potential savings, and we're seeing the whole nine. And so as I dig deeper into this environment that's already been fully configured, we can actually get more granular here, right? In terms of just being able to see our cost on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and even on a monthly basis as well. And then we've also got these really great interactive charts that as I hover over things, I can get a breakdown. Say, for example, if I wanted to see, my compute capacity remaining, I can break that out and I can see all the different types of things there. And I can also see my cost drivers, which is what we're going to be spending a lot of time configuring in this particular session here. But I can see how my costs are broken out by things like, facilities and things like along those lines. I can actually see my costs by, domains as well. And as I sort of go down here and sort of check out some of the additional settings here, this is the end zone. So this is what we're trying to achieve here, right? And so as we go back to the base pod, if you will, one of the things that I've done in terms of just, in order to get like that environment to the state here, what I've basically done is I've actually sort of configured like this no nonsense sort of 6-step sort of checklist, if you will, that allows me to be successful every time, right? And so what we're going to be doing, we're going to be setting the currency, we're going to be inputting expenses to achieve our total cost of ownership. We're going to look at how we can take those expenses and convert those to actual costs in terms of our capital expenditures, right? How much it costs us to actually run the environment. And then we're going to, at that point, once we've actually set up our costs, we're going to figure out our pricing in terms of establishing, our showback and our chargebacks and things along those lines. And then we're going to be tagging resources because obviously when we're doing our chargebacks and things along those lines, you want to make sure that we're tagging them to the appropriate business units. And then to Abhijit's point, we're going to take advantage of some of the visualization tools as well to sort of make sure that we're able to sort of see how all the costs are going with the environment here. And so with that said, I'm just going to jump back into the environment here. And the first thing, as you can see here, so this is the base pod. Everybody's been working on it all the way up into this duration here. So if you get a pod where you're setting up cost and capacity, this is what it's going to look like. There's literally going to be nothing there at all, right? So the first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and go to our global settings here. We want to just basically, go to our cost and our pricing piece here. And so with this, let's just hover over here. And obviously, we want to be able to set the currency. So let's just go ahead and do that here. So as I hover over this, and let's just do a keyword search here. Let's just say, all right, going to pick our currency here. We're just going to go ahead and set that, right? And so now we've got our currency set. I just wanted to walk through some of the base settings. And again, here, no nonsense. I'm just going to focus on the things that I typically do in terms of my 6-step process, in terms of like configuring things. There is a lot to do here. And I got to say, if you guys are going to be in Vegas at Explore, I'm going to be going through all the different bells and whistles. And so if you're going to be at Explore, be sure to check out my FinOps section here. But in this particular case, again, just focusing on the essentials in terms of some of the configurations here. And so again, you see our options to show our cost savings. We got our cost calculations where we can have VCF automatically, do cost calculations at a specific time. We got our cluster utilization factor. And for those of you who are wondering here, basically what this is, it's basically a rounding step, if you will, for like server resource usage, right? So instead of constantly, recalculating your hardware-based costs every time, say, for example, CPU or memory usage moves by a fraction of a percent, right? This rounding setting just actually sort of rounds it up to the nearest step or block. And then by default, it's 5%. I typically don't touch any of those things, but what I do is I always activate my tag-based costing metrics because, again, this comes in really, really handy for me if I'm bringing in tags over from vSphere and bringing them into VCF, or inversely, if I'm creating tags inside of VCF, I can actually push them back out to vSphere. And this particularly comes really, really handy if I'm doing things like I'm assigning like SLAs, or if I'm have some hardware that's actually leased and not owned, and I can just put in my monthly operational costs and things along those lines. And so this is pretty much the only thing besides setting currency that I will activate. And so I'm just going to go ahead and click save here. And at that particular point, you're going to start to see some traction here in terms of like where we were before. So before we had nothing, and now we're starting to see some progress here, but we're not really quite there yet, right? And so now this is where we go into those cost drivers. So if you saw the original sort of the stood up environment where I had the interactive charts and I was hovering over things and seeing those percentages, this is where you're going to be able to go and get that done here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to go into my configurations option here. And at this particular point, I'm just going to click my cost drivers. And so again, if you remember those interactive charts, this is a one-to-one sort of mapping of that particular dashboard that we were looking at when we were sort of accessing our overall total cost of ownerships and things along those lines. And so let's say, for example, here, I want to configure, my server hardware for this environment here. Now, one of the things that I'm going to point out here is that these costs right here, you're probably wondering where the heck these prices come from, Kels, or what along those lines. And so these are basically some standard rates that come with VCF out of the box. But in terms of being able to get true costing metrics and things along those lines, this is where you're going to have to go in and input these costs yourself, because once you enable costs, it's going to default to this. But again, if you want to get truly accurate costs, this is where you're going to have to go in and get that configured. And so in this particular case, you're going to see why here, right? And so as I look at my server hardware for all of my different cost drivers, I can see my server names, I can see my data centers, I can see the purchase costs, I can see all this good stuff here. And what's really, really great about this is that all this data is exposed in these table fields here where I can actually see the manufacturer, I can see the purchase date, I can see my monthly costs, all this stuff is here. But as I sort of drill down into, say, for example, this particular server here. Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting, because if I were to edit this, you're going to see something really, really interesting here in terms of the price. Anyone notice anything about, obviously, do you see this price here in terms of the decimal places? It's very, very specific, right? In terms of like, the umpteenth degree, right? But what's really, really great about this is that with this accuracy, obviously, when you're calculating, your monthly cost, your total cost of ownership, what it's basically doing is it's looking at the number of months, and then it's dividing it by the number of days in that month, then it's multiplying it back to that current day in the month. And so this is where you're getting these specific percentages like that. And so again, if you want to get truly, truly accurate costs, you want to override these default settings to put in your actual costs. And so here, in this particular case, if I were to highlight this and just say, you know what, this particular server cost me 45 grand or something along those lines. And again, with the percentage for my compute percentage, I can be very, very accurate here as well in terms of what I want it to be. Now, with this being said, you may be asking yourself, well, how do I get the server cost? Obviously you can go to your finance teams or whoever's handling the purchases. You can get this, and you can, again, go into your cost drivers and enter in the cost driver savings that are going to be reflective of your actual hardware purchases. Now, one of the things that I also want to point out here is that we've got this thing known as purchase type, right? So you've got two different types of purchases here. Obviously, you've got your owned hardware, which is what we've got here, but you also have a leased option. And the reason why these are very, very important to denote in terms of your cost drivers is that, say, for example, if you've got this hardware and you truly own it, that's going to actually represent, your CapEx, your capital expenditures, right? And that's going to have a direct impact on, your depreciation value, which we're going to be talking about in a minute. But if you've got something that's leased, that's actually more of an operational expense, right? And so there's really no depreciation cost there. It's just pretty much whatever you leased it for. You want to divide that overall cost by the duration of your leasing period and things like that. And so we're going to be showing that in a minute here. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that if you're owning it, that's a capital expenditure. And if you're leasing it, that's an operational expense. And again, if you're owning it, you're going to have to factor in depreciation costs. And we're going to be talking about that. So with that, let's just go ahead and just click save here. And let's just go back into our cost drivers. I'm going to modify some additional things here. So in this particular case, let's just say we want to highlight our maintenance costs or something along those lines. So here I can go in, and as you can see here, I got a different types of edit modes. I can do edits for like all of my data centers. If I wanted to do specific edits for a specific one, obviously I can do this here as well. So these are in this particular case, these numbers look good to me, so I'm not going to modify these, but I'm going to go back into my cost drivers and let's look at like our labor costs or something along these lines here. And you can see here, we've got a lot of different types of things that we can do. We've got our operating system costs, where again, we can get very, very sort of granular in terms of how you want to configure this, right? We've got our monthly, hours of labor, we've got our hourly rate, we've got just a lot of different types of knobs and dials that we can twist and we can modify and things along those lines. And so I just wanted to make you aware where all these things are. These are types of things that, as you're going in and you want to modify, things for like your servers and things like that, this is where you're going to be able to go and do that. So as I sort of go through all these different options, I just wanted to make you aware again where this stuff lives. In terms of like my VM costs, again, all of this is great. But say, for example, I don't particularly know what my operating systems are in terms of like that level of granularity, but I do know, say, for example, what my overall cost of labor is, without getting and breaking it down to my operating system, my servers or my VMs. I can actually just sort of override this and say, you know what, bump all that. I'm just going to go ahead here and I'm just going to do this. So in this particular case, I can go ahead here and I can just override it. And so whatever that cost was, I'm saying it's $135. I can go ahead here and I can click and I can save that. Now, with that being said, I'm going to modify one more thing here. So let's say, for example, our networking costs. Again, I can do it for all of my data centers. I can do it for a specific one. Again, I can go through and I can assign cost to each and every one of these. But again, if I don't necessarily know to that level of granularity, but I do know what the overall cost is, I can go ahead here and I can actually just sort of override that total cost. Then I can click save. And then last but not least, let's just do some of our facilities costs, because that's something that I really, really like to show in my demos here. And so in this particular case, I'm just going to go down to my facilities. And again, we've got this level of granularity here. You've seen this before, but what I'm going to do here, I'm going to just override the cost again and just say, you know what, let's just make this $1,500 or whatever, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and click save. All right. And now with that being said, I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to talk about, cluster costs and things along those lines. And so let's just go ahead and do this, right? So in terms of my cluster costs, as you can see here, we've got a lot of different types of things happening here in terms of like the different types of ways that we can calculate it, right? So we've got two different types. We've got a cluster base rate where we can actually use cluster usable capacity after HA and buffer, but we can actually change and modify this as well. And so say, for example, if I wanted to change that, I can go here. And one of the things about this is as I'm doing this, you may be asking yourself, well, hey, Kels, what's the difference between, cluster usable capacity versus, cluster with actual utilization? And basically at a real high level, right, um, the cluster usable, capacity after HM bus, that's basically like you're basically telling VCF to calculate your cost based on what the cluster is actually capable of running, right? And it's really, really sort of in a use case scenario. It's best used for like, again, charge back or show back where teams just really, really need a predictable, way to sort of generate these monthly bills that don't shift when other teams are like spinning up VMs or, spinning them up or down and things along those lines. Whereas with the cluster actual utilization, what we have here, right? This is actually just telling VCF, you know what? Calculate the cost based on what the VMs are actually consuming right now, right? So it's really, in terms of a use case scenario, it's really, really best used for like, a dedicated sort of like a single tenant, cluster where, 100%, if you will, of that cluster's cost, it's got to be completely absorbed, by active workloads at all times. And right. And so in terms of like an analogy, because again, when I put this stuff together, I try to make it make sense to me in terms of like some of everyday sort of analogies, right? So you can kind of say, for example, you got a you're renting a car, right? You got a 4-passenger car, right? And you're charging, like $100 a day, right? With the usable capacity, what this basically means is that you've got in this 4-seater, right? You've got 3 safe seats and you got one space for like luggage, if you will, right? And so basically you can divide that $100 per day by those 3 usable seats, right? So basically it's $33, per seat, right? And that price per seat is actually fixed every single day, regardless of whether one person or 3 people are riding it, right? Whereas with the actual utilization, right? If you got $100 a day, if one person gets in that car today, it's going to cost that person $100. But on the next day, let's say, for example, 2 people get in the car, then each person pays $50. But if you're on another day, 4 people to get into this 4-seater, you can see how this math is breaking out, right? Everybody pays, $25 each. And so I typically just stay with the default. So I'm just going to go ahead here and I'm just going to cancel out. But I just wanted to sort of make everybody aware of that. Now, in terms of the cost settings, we talked about the differences between, owning your hardware, which is a capital expense, versus, leasing it, which is an operational expense. And so in this particular case, I own the hardware or the company owns the hardware, but I want to be able to sort of set, my depreciation value because again, all of this is going to factor, in the total cost of ownership here. So let's just say like I've got a server, it's 36 grand. And let's say, I got my depreciation value sort of going out over the span of like 3 years. So obviously, 36 months, 36 grand, it's depreciating, $100 a month or something along those lines. But then you've also got something, known as, max or straight. And so what this basically is, everyone, is just saying, basically, we want to front load the depreciation value in the beginning, and then over time, that depreciation value sort of decrease. So maybe the first month is $100, or the first several months is $100, but as time progresses, that depreciation value maybe goes to 75 to eventually 50 and whatnot. And so just wanted to make everybody sort of aware of the differences, between that, right? And so here, I'm just going to go ahead and just click save. And then I'm going to go ahead and just take this particular cluster here, and I'm just going to edit the cost ratio. Again, I promise you, after the end of this session, you're going to be able to moonlight as a CPA. But one of the things here in terms of editing your cluster cost ratios, you can see here, this is actually a new feature that came out with VCF 9.1. A lot of customers have been asking for this. And the reason why this is really, really important is that I can actually control how things are allocated, right? And so in this particular case here, let's just say I want to do a sort of like a 3-to-1, ratio of this, and I want to go ahead and click save. Now, the reason for this being, so say for example, and again, I'm going to use another analogy here, like, Kels, why is this important, right? And so with that being said, so imagine a scenario, right? Where, your company, you hire this caterer, right? And they've got this budget. It's $1,000 to cater this party, right? And that catering consists of, some food and some drinks, right? And so if it's $1,000, right? A 50-50 split would mean, 500 for the food and 500 for the drinks. But therein lies the problem, right? And so, say for example, you got a party, you got the engineering department, they show up and they're eating, but they're not necessarily having beverages, if you will, right? They're drinking, they're eating, but they're drinking water. Whereas the sales team, they're having the adult beverages, if you will. They're far more expensive, right? And so if you were to split that between the engineering department and the sales department, it's not going to necessarily be fair, to the engineering department, because the food actually costs less than the beverages, if you will, right? And so this is a way that you can sort of make sure, that the costs are adjusted, properly, right? So to really make it fair, you're able to sort of do that. So again, if you could think about a party scenario where you got the CPU, that's the food, but the memories, that's the open bar, right? And so by giving you that ability to sort of manually sort of configure, the CPU to that memory ratio, it actually lets you sort of reflect, that actual sort of the cost, right? And really just assuring that, everyone who has consumed the more expensive beverages, that they're paying appropriately and things along those lines. And so that's pretty much the sort of the rationale behind, making sure that you got those things sort of set up here. And so with that being said, what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go back into my cost drivers, and I'm going to actually sort of update the cost here. And so with that being said, let's just go ahead and do that. And so let's go ahead and just go back to my cost drivers. And as you can see here, so you remember earlier when I was in my global settings page and I said that, VCF will automatically sort of do a cost update on a daily basis, and you can set that time. Well, you can actually trigger costs manually as well here. And so with this being said, now that I've got all of my expenditures located and entered here, I'm going to tell VCF, you know what, I don't want you to wait till 9 p.m. tonight. I want you to go ahead and do it now. So there's a way that you can actually manually sort of get that done. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this. And then at this particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back, and after it's being ran, I'm going to go back to my manager. Now we're getting closer to that end game, right? That end zone and that originally sort of stood up environment where everything was configured, right? And so here, as you can see here, I'm getting that interactivity. I'm starting to see my costs, my TCO, whether it's by capacity, I can see all of this here. So it's all starting to sort of come together now, if you will. Now, with this being said, now that I've got my cost of what it costs to run my environment, and one of the great things is that now we're like at step 3, if you will, where we're actually sort of looking at how the costs are basically created within VCF here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to toggle back out and talk about this. So now we're in step 3 where we're talking about our expenses to cost. So you saw me, I went in, configure my cost drivers, right? I have my hardware, I've got my facilities, my labor, got all of my networks, all that cost here. So what's happening in the background at VCF is that it's using those numbers and it's assigning costs based off of your loaded, your server costs, your clusters, your base rates. It's taking your data stores and it's pushing all of this stuff out, and you're getting your cost per CPU, your memory costs, your storage costs, your additional costs. So all of that now is happening in the background so that we can actually see what our resources are costing all the way from a cluster to a VM level. And so that's happening in the background. So again, that's why it's really, really essential that as you're going in and you're configuring your cost drivers, that if you really want truly accurate costs, you're going to go into those cost drivers and you're going to override those industry standards and put in your actual cost so that you can get truly, truly accurate total cost of ownership. And so with that being said, I wanted to talk about show back and charge back. So we kind of hinted on this earlier, right? We were talking about the spinning up of the resources and things like that, right? So obviously, me and my manager, Dave, we've had a lot of discussions about the best way to sort of explain, cost. This is our cost. And this is what we use to generate our show back report so that we can show the various lines of businesses, right? So as you can see here on the screen, right, as you sort of quantify how much it costs your department to sort of run your environment, showbacks is basically, that cost. It's, you're showing the internal teams, this is how much it's costing to run the VMs that you're spinning up. Whereas with price and chargeback, you're saying, you know what? This is how much it's costing, and this is how much it's costing you. And it's basically sort of like a bill, if you will. So again, I like to use analogies, right? So you can consider sort of like a show back. It's more like a show and tell, right? It's like a receipt, if you will, whereas with the chargeback, it's more like a bill. And so imagine a scenario where you got a roommate and you go and you do grocery shopping for everyone in the house, and you tell your roommate, you know what? Here's the receipt. Those vegan cookies that you loved a lot, those cost $80. No money is changing hands. You're just sort of showing the receipt, right? But you're making them aware of how much they're spending on their vegan cookies, if you will. Whereas with chargeback, you're saying, you know what, those vegan cookies that you wanted, they cost $80. I'm going to need you to Venmo me that back because those are really, really expensive. And I bet that person will probably not want to pay $80 for those vegan cookies moving forward. And they may go for a cheaper brand. So again, it's really about showback being more like the receipt where you're trying to encourage a different type of behavior. Whereas with chargeback, it's more like an accountability sort of a thing, right? Where again, money is exchanging hands. And so with that, there's a couple things that needs to be configured here before I go back into this base pod, right? I just wanted to make sure that people understand, the different sort of pricing policies, because as you're setting up your cost and your pricing, you're going to have a pricing strategy, right? So you've got two different types of pricing strategy. You've got a cost-based sort of like a strategy, if you will, where you're basically saying, you know what? It's sort of like a pass-through expense, right? Where you're sort of just saying, you know what, this is how much it's costing me to run this hardware, and I'm just going to tack on maybe 20%, like a 20% margin or a factor, if you will. Whereas with rate-based, it's more like say, for example, like a custom menu price, right? Where I can set custom prices. Say, for example, like for CPU, I can charge, a certain amount per month, or for memory, a certain amount for gigabytes per month, and for storage. And so you get the idea here, right? And so again, in terms of like an analogy that sort of you can take home with you, right? So imagine, you're and this is one of my favorite ones here in terms of like seafood, right? Seafood, it fluctuates depending on it, right? And so like you can go say, for example, lobster, if you will, right? It could cost you $20 a day, and you can just say, you know what? I'm going to sell it to my customers for a 10% markup. And so that's sort of like that cost base. I'm just going to pass on my cost plus an additional 10%, right? Whereas with rate based, it's more like you're saying to the customer, this lobster is going to be $35, and that rate is never going to change. But the thing that you have to be mindful of here is that, if you bought that lobster for $15 one day, you're making money, right? But say, for example, there's a shortage and you end up buying that lobster for $30. You have to make sure that as you're picking your right strategy here, that you're doing so in a way that if you wanted to be profitable or like a managed service provider, that you're going to make sure that you're picking that proper sort of pricing strategy. So those are the two different types. You got the cost base, which you're passing on like a margin or 20% increase or something along those lines. Whereas what you got a rate base where you're literally getting granular and you're charging, for each one of these resources, whether it's by gigabytes or these CPUs or things along those lines. And so with that, let's just go ahead and configure some things here, right? So I'm just going to go over into my operate tab here, and let's go down to administration. This is where you're going to find it. And if I go into my configurations here, one of the things that I want to do, we're going to talk about our policy definitions. This is going to be a place where you're going to be living quite a lot, quite frankly, when you're configuring your cost and your capacity and things like here. And so I got my default policy. In this particular case, I'm just going to modify the default policy. But if you're working in an environment where you've got multiple tenants, and we're going to be talking about tenants in a little bit later, and then we're going to go into more detail when we go into the more advanced portions of this where we talk about VCFA and getting that configured and doing true billing and things along those lines. And so, but in this particular case, I'm just going to edit my default policy here. So let's just let this spin up and let's just go and edit this policy, if you will. Now, as I scroll down, you know, this is another question that pops up a lot, say, hey, Kelps, we've got two different pricing options here. We've got the VC pricing and we've got provider pricing, right? And what's the difference, right, between the two? And so, and basically, in this in particular scenario, I'm going to use VC pricing because we don't have automation set up yet, which is more ideal for provider pricing. So in this particular case, I'm going to use VC pricing, but I'm going to really sort of clarify what the difference between the two are, right? So basically, it all boils down to like who actually owns the infrastructure and how the building is being defined, right? So the VC pricing or the vCenter pricing is basically the prices that are calculated on your own sort of private cloud infrastructure, right? It's directly attached to your vCenters, and you can assign these pricing rules, whereas with provider pricing, that's really more so for those multi-tenant environments. That's really, really ideal when you got VCFA integrated. And again, we're going to be talking about that in a future session, possibly even as early as next week. But that's basically the difference between the two. And again, no description would be complete without like an analogy, right? And so you could kind of consider like with VC pricing, you got an apartment building, right? You've got the different units and then you own it, right? Well, with VC pricing, it's more like you got your internal HOA, you got your rules where, you got the building owner, you got all your internal maintenance costs set up, whether it's, cutting the grass or the water usage and those things. It's already sort of default and it's built into your HOA fees, where it was with provider pricing, it's more like you own the building, but you got special lease rates, right? So say, for example, on the ground floor of this building, you may have a completely like a section of the ground floor. It could all be retail spaces, and they have different rates and things like that that will apply, right? So when you think about it in terms of like VCFA, which we're going to be integrating in a later session, it's really around that idea around just handling sort of like multi-tenant billing, right? You got your organization, you got your quotas, you got your custom rate cards, you got things like that. So but in this particular case, we're not there yet. I'm just setting up for my own little infrastructure here, this little pod environment here. So I'm going to go inside my VC pricing. And one of the things that you're going to do right out of the gate is you're going to enable the pricing engine, right? Isn't that a cool name, pricing engine? So we're going to turn this on. And one of the things that we just talked about, we talked about this whole notion of, based off cost, where you can add in a markup, if you will, for 20% or something along those lines. And again, if you remember that slide that I showed earlier, we can actually do it, based on rate as well, where if I wanted to, do something with my CPUs, I can charge, whether it's hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly, I can do all of that. I can even specify, if it's always turned on, if only when it's powered on, I can control how things are being, in terms of like build and things like that. So in this particular case, I'm just going to do the markup, right? So I'm just going to go ahead here and just say, you know what, 20% markup here. Let's do another 20%, another 20%. So you guys get the idea here. And again, I can go and I can get all this level of granularity here. But again, in terms of where things live, this is where you're going to initially start, but then you can actually go in and you can do other things as well, like your guest OS right here. You can go in here and you can get, again, really, really granular in terms of like what you want to charge. We talked about the tagging piece, and let me just sort of set up the scenario here. So I can actually create, tags and things along those lines. So if I wanted to maybe charge a line of business more money or something like that for having a SLA, maybe they have a goal SLA and they've got disaster recovery and things along those lines. I can actually go in and then tag tags here. I can set up tags for like, one-time setup charges, all that type of stuff is available to sort of tag and associate like a price to it, if you will. So in this particular case, like my overall charges here, we can do VM setup charges and things along those lines. And again, if I had VCF automation set up, I can actually add tags for my VKS resources and things along those lines here. And so with that, this is a great sort of segue, sort of talk about the tags here. So let me just go ahead and click on save here. And so now we're at step number 5, right? Where we're looking at our resources and things along those lines. And we just talked about that whole scenario where if you got SLAs, whether it's gold, silver, or bronze, we can take those tags and bring them into VCF or vice versa, push them back out to vSphere. So let's just go back into this pod environment. And as you can see here, since this environment is brand new, it's already, there's no tags here. But one of the great things about the integration with vSphere is that I can actually go into my vSphere environment and I can look at my environment here. And, one of the things that I did for this demo is I spun up some additional VMs, from like my FinOps VMs, if you will. And as you can see here, as I sort of scroll down, I've got some tags already set up. So this particular VM, it's got an SLA of gold. The cost center is going to our sales team, the people that drink all the beverages at the party and stuff like that. And so we've got all that in terms of the ownership. But there's some additional tags here that I wanted to make you aware of. And so like if I were to see all the different tags here, I can see I've got my SLAs. I can see who the business owners of these VMs and things along those lines. And so rather than recreating the wheel and manually, taking this stuff from vSphere and manually recreating it inside of VCF operations, I can actually take advantage of this really, really cool feature known as import. So dig it, right? So as I click on this, I'm going to go back to this environment here. And I'm just going to import this bad boy. So as it's spinning, it's thinking, it's going to bring all this stuff over. And so, you hear us talk about that single source of truth, right? Where you've got VCF and you got this pane of glass, if you will, where you can see everything. So none of that swivel chair stuff where it's like, I got to go to VCF for this and I got to go to vSphere for that. You can just forget about all that. You can bring it all inside of VCF. So there's none of that swivel chair going on, right? You can actually, again, use VCF as your single pane of glass, if you will. So here's all the SLAs that were brought over. You can see in this particular environment, the objects that I've tagged. We can actually see the cost centers. We can see all those different types of things along those lines as well. And so, again, you don't have to recreate the wheel because of the bidirectional functionality with VCF, looking at all the different components, whether it's operations or automation or even the integration with vSphere. It's all coming into this environment where you can see everything. And so with that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back now and I'm going to just take a look at one of those VMs, if you will, that was inside of vSphere. So I'm just going to go into my inventory piece here and I'm going to look at this one VM that I spun up for this FinOps demo. So what I'm going to do, and you're going to see something very similar here, right, in terms of like the mapping of my tag. So what we were looking at in vSphere is now being reflected inside of Ops, right? And now that I've got my costs and everything configured, one of the things that I like to do is sort of just to start to see if some of the metrics are coming through, right? And so let's just go ahead and look at our metrics for this particular object here. So let's go here into metrics, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into cost, and I'm going to expand that. And let's look at my month-to-date cost. And as you can see here, it's spinning up. We've got some things happening. When we originally did the cost drivers, it was higher because I was using some of the standard industry standards, but as I modified it, my total cost of ownership lowered a bit. So this is reflective of that, right? And so we've got some action going on here. And so we're going to, at this particular point, we're going to go back to that last step, right? So we've got our costs, we've got our price, we've got our owners and all the resources tagged and all those types of things. And so again, we can go back into this base pod and we can start to see, how this stuff is being visualized in terms of like some of the data here. And one of the best ways to do this right out of the gate with no configuration at all is to go back into the dashboards here, right? And so here, we can see, our chargeback prices, right? This is, what we're going to be, charging all the different business units and things along those lines. And we've got our show back as well, where we can actually see, our VMs in terms of how they're being priced and things along those lines. And so there's a lot of great data here in terms of setting it up. So basically that is my sort of like my 6-step, no nonsense approach to getting an environment stood up for cost and pricing in terms of the configuration aspect of it. And the reason why I wanted to do cost first is because cost has a direct impact on capacity. And so with that, we're here in the agenda here, right? And so just like before, what I wanted to do is we're going to jump to like a more advanced iteration of this pod where I've spun up some additional VMs and the VMs have been running for some additional days so that I can get some truly accurate historical data. And I'm going to be talking about why that's important in a moment here. And so with that being said, let's just go back into a different iteration of this environment. And as you can see here, we've got a lot of things going on. We've got, like I said, the overall capacity, we've got capacity remaining, and we got just all this data here. What I'm going to ready to do right now is I'm just actually going to break this all down. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on this view capacity option. And one of the questions that I get, actually, before I do that, I want to talk about, you can see here, we've got our data centers, right? We've got this one workload domain. It's telling me, hey, Kels, everything's gravy, everything's good. You got more than a year of capacity for your CPU, your memory, your disk space. But we've also got this other data center here that, we've run out of capacity here. You may want to look into this, right? So with that being said, one of the things that VCF does, it uses particular algorithms where you can actually sort
Hey,
of see
Kelsey?
how. Yes.
Yeah, we need to get on to the fleet management. So if you can try and wrap
Okay.
this up in the next few minutes, thanks.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap it up right now. So say, for example, here, so I can click on my disk space. I can sort of see how things are going outward. I can actually tell it to look forward in terms of the history. I can tell it to look forward, and I can have it project out. We can do all this type of stuff here. So in this particular case, I'm going to turn my attention to this really, really bad data center here. And as you can see here, we're getting some errors all over the place in terms of just some of the usage here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the memory. And as you can see here, we've got our usable capacity line, we've got our projections, we got a lot of different types of stuff here. And so one of the things that I could do in terms of like my CPU, you can see here, we've got a lot of crazy activity that's going on here. And this is no doubt because of all the hard work that, Abhijit and Kyle and Andrew's been doing in terms of just spinning up these VMs. And so we've got all this craziness happening here, right? And so with this particularly said, I'm going to go and just talk about risk tolerance. I'm just going to blow through this really, really quickly here. And so with this, let's just go ahead and go and just sort of look at how this is being impacted, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and go to my administration piece here. I'm going to go back into my global settings. Again, there really isn't a lot that I modify here, but I do talk about the capacity optimization piece here. So these are some of the things that you can modify. I don't typically touch any of these, but one of the things that I do is I do say, hey, you know what? Exclude really do VMs from this. And so I'm just going to go ahead and click save. And the reason for that being is because, VCF will actually take a VM and it will look at its historical data and push outward. And so in this particular case, as you can see here, in preparation for this, we've got a lot of different types of things going on. But in terms of configuring capacity, I can turn on my critical thresholds. I can tell it to give me a warning in this particular case because it's less than 90 days, it's red. Anything between 90 and 120 is going to be yellow, and anything beyond that is going to be green. I can also set my risk levels here. Basically, what this is saying that from a conservative or an aggressive point of view, like if you got a production environment, you definitely want to be more conservative. Whereas if you got a test dev environment, you can be more aggressive in terms of that type of stuff. And so as I scroll downward here, I can exclude storage and things along those lines. And there's a scenario where, storage is always available on demand. So you may just say, you know what, I don't want to get a constrained resource warning for storage because I can always replace that on demand. So in this particular case, I'm not going to fool with that. And then for the allocation model, we've got different types of way that we can configure this as well. And then in terms of like some of the capacity buffers, you can configure this as well in terms of like the CPU versus demand and allocation models and things along those lines. And then as I sort of scroll down, you can do business hours as well. And obviously, with this particular thing done, you can just say, you know what, I only want VCF to sort of monitor capacity, during business hours. I don't want to look at Saturday or Sunday, and I just only want it to do it, maybe from 8 to 6 every day, and I can set all of my prices and things along those lines. And so with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and click save. Now we still got this issue here, right? In terms of like, some of the anomalous time ranges here, right? So one of the things that we can do when I configure my allocation model, we've got all this stuff set up. And as you can see here, it's starting to sort of calculate. It doesn't know how much, and we've got our time remaining. And so one of the things that we can also do in terms of like some of the cluster management to deal with all of these spikes that were happening in preparation for today's webinar, one of the things that I could do is I can actually go in here and say, you know what, I'm going to go to my inventory here and I'm going to reset this because there was a lot of crazy activity that was happening as we were sort of getting ready for this webinar. And if I were to go in, let's just say, you know what, I want to exclude all the setup time that we did to sort of get this, happening here. And if I did this and I click confirm, you're going to know something really interesting here is that my usage and things like that are going to update here. So as you can see here, I've gone from 27 days to 40 days because I said, hey, you know what? Exclude all that weirdness that's going on there, right? So you can actually see all this stuff happening here. And then last but not least, one of the things that I'm going to do, like I typically do with these demos, is just show the dashboards, right? So to show all the coolness, if you will, right? So if I were to go to dashboards, I can actually sort of see all of my capacity, all the bells and whistles and things along those lines here. And so with that, that's it. I'm going to pass it on over to you, Andrew.
Well, thanks very much, Kelsey. That was very comprehensive. So this is Andrew Firth. I'm from the VCF technical marketing team. Abhijit and Kelsey did a great job introducing VCF operations. And they also touched on fleet management. So what I'm going to do now is walk you through some of the core functions which come under the umbrella of fleet management. These are the kind of functions which an admin would come in and set up to make an environment operationally ready. So this is done after VCF has been deployed, but before it goes into production. It's also where admins and ops teams can also come in to perform regular access level and configuration level management. And it's called fleet management because these functions are managed from VCF operations, which is the single console which can be used to configure across VCF domains, across VCF instances within a VCF fleet. So let's just take a look at the environment that we have here. All right, so we can see well, we're in the console. we can access fleet management in a number of different ways. So we can go to the Manage tab. All right, we can see fleet management here, and we can see, everything that's underneath it. If we go back to the home page, a lot of the fleet management capabilities are also accessible directly from this particular dashboard. So what we're looking at here certificates. So being able to, come in and set up your certificates and even configure a central certificate authority for the fleet. Likewise, we can come in and also centrally manage our component passwords. And we also have identity and access as well. So this is where you can come in and set up single sign-on access with your own identity provider. And that's for access and authentication to all the VCF components. So these are the three kind of core functions that I'm going to be focusing on today. These are sometimes referred to as day one operations because, as I just mentioned, these help to ensure your VCF fleet is operationally ready. Now, quickly though, and I know Kelsey did briefly cover tags just a few moments ago, but it would be remiss of me just to, skim over these. So yes, we have the ability to create and import tags. So we can come in here, we create a category name. Kelsey showed the example of, being able to create one for service levels, for example. So you can come in here, create one for service levels, and then that's the category. And then we actually configure the tag. So we can configure gold, silver, bronze. And what we do with these tags is then we come in and we then assign them to different components of the VCF infrastructure. So Kelsey covered that, so I'm not going to go into too much detail there. And we also have configuration management too. So within here, you can create configuration templates. All right. And these configuration templates define a desired state of your VCF infrastructure. And we have two different types of templates here. So in VCF 9.1, we added cluster level templates. All right. These two different templates, so the vCenter templates that we see here, they're specific to vCenter appliance configuration. All right, and the cluster templates use a vSphere configuration profile, and they use that to define the desired state of your ESX hosts in a cluster. So you can build lots of these, and I have cheated here. I've actually come in and I've actually configured just an example template of each, so a vCenter template and a cluster template. Well, once you actually configure the template, what you can do then is you can monitor for drift. All right, so you can see here the two different domains we have, the management domain and the workload domain. I've come in here, I've done a drift detection, and this particular vCenter appliance hasn't drifted from its desired state configuration, which is good. Now I've come in here, I've also created a cluster level template. Now remember, these use a vSphere configuration profile. Initially, it came in and the way I'd configured it, there was no drift. But what I did just to show you what it looks like when there is a drift, so you come in here to run a drift detection exercise again, but we can actually view at a cluster level where our drifts are. So here we have configured our CPU power policies. All right, the expected value that we would see as a desired state would be for this CPU power policy to be set to balanced, but the current value is set at high performance. All right, and this applies across all of the hosts in this particular cluster. So what we can do here, and this is also new to VCF 9.1, is that we can come in and we can download a remediation JSON file. All right, and we can use this remediation JSON file, right, to come in and actually rectify the environment. All right, so that's tags and that's configuration management. If you'd like to know more about tags and configuration management, check out our online demos and our videos on the Broadcom Sales Resource Center page. All right, there's on YouTube as well. There are lots of great resources there. All right, So certificates, passwords, and identity and access. So we'll start with certificate management. And generally, I think that the approach to use here is to actually start from the top and work your way down. That's just the way that I think of it. So certificate management is quite comprehensive in VCF. And I think it's, one of the first things that admin would come in and actually set up from day one. And it's really important to understand how certificates work so that you as an admin can ensure the communication between your VCF components is encrypted and secure, no man in the middle type of scenarios. It's all about establishing and maintaining a secure trust chain between your VCF components. Now we have some new navigation here, which is part of the new revised VCF operations console. All right, so if we come in here, we can actually view our certificates a number of different ways. So we look at our management components, and we can use this really handy filtering capability here. And if we expand these, we can actually see all of the different components under VCF management. All right, so I won't read those out. I'm sure you can read those. We can come in here and we can filter for either the component, whether we've got any upcoming expiries that are coming, our renewal status. So I'll go into that in a bit of detail in a moment. We'll talk about auto renewal, certificate types. So here we have our different CAs. So we have our VM CA, our Microsoft CA, and OpenSSL, which are all integrated as part of the platform. And we can also use external CAs too. We have our categories, so just being able to search by different certificate types, and we have our common names as well. All right, so that's management. Now, if we actually have and expand our instances, and our instance name here for this VCF instance is called instance A. If we have a look at the components, you'll see that they're different, and these are our infrastructure level components. All right, so you can see all of those. New to VCF 9.1, we introduced VCF Operations HCX and the RV Load Balancer. All right. If we expand instances further, we can see a more detailed view of each domain. All right. So this is our management domain and our workload domain here. So we're just seeing the components of this workload domain in this example. If I go to the instance level, we're seeing all of the components across all of the instances. So that would include all of the domains. Now, also new for VCF Operations 9.1 is the ability to actually add in additional vCenters that are outside of VCF into management, all right, for certificate management. So we can do that here as well. And last but definitely not least, we also support, so that supports vSphere instances of 8.0 update 3 and above. We also support VCF 5.2.x components as well. So if you're running a mixed environment, a 9.x environment mixed with 5.2, and you're running VCF operations 9.1, all right, you can also manage those 5.2.x components. All right, so the dashboard here provides a quick view of identifying any areas of focus. You can see here, this is actually looking pretty good. We haven't configured auto renewal yet. We'll do that shortly. As part of a VCF deployment, all of the core components that are configured out of the box, they're configured with a VMware CA. All right, and this VMware CA secures a communication just between the VCF components. All right, so it's a good starting point to keep things secure, but you definitely want to configure your own enterprise CA on top of that, which brings in everything else into your environment. Now, let's just have a look at an example here. So if we go down to the infrastructure level, let's just say we choose our workload domain. We can select a vCenter certificate. I can show you how the cool little searching capability works. So we can search for vCenter, we can search for TLS, all right, and here's our vCenter certificate, all right, and it's just a matter of, if this is just configured with a VMCA for now. As I said, you'd configure a CA server, but the process to renew a certificate is super easy. So you can see here the expiry date, all right, so when viewing certificates, you see the component, the FQDN, the status, the type of certificate it is, and the expiry. So if I just turn that off, I jumped ahead a little bit here. But we can see all of our different certificates here and all of our different expiries. So we can filter those and search those. All right, so let's just choose that one again, and we can basically select to renew the certificate. All right, so it's going to renew the certificate for the vCenter in the workload domain. All right, so you see it cancel there on that. I've selected the wrong one. You can't update the root certificates. It's all about updating the TLS certificates. So if I come in here and select vCenter and TLS, oops, let's get rid of that. All right, I'll select that. I hit renew, and this will actually renew the certificate for us. Now, as I mentioned, so we'll let that run. As I mentioned, what we should be doing is configuring a CA, all right? So a CA for this environment. And most customers are definitely using a certificate authority. So we come in here at the management level, and we actually configure the CA for the fleet. Now, out of the box, we integrate with the Microsoft CA and also OpenSSL, um, and you can configure either. We also support, obviously, external CAs outside of that, and we do provide some level of orchestration with updating and importing certificates there. So what's new for VCF 9.1 is that we also, for the Microsoft CA, we support both the managed components and the infrastructure components. All right, so this OpenSSL, if we actually go and configure an OpenSSL CA, this will actually configure this as a service running in VCF operations. So rather than having to go in and actually configure OpenSSL manually, it'll actually run it in operations for you. So we could create one here. So we just call it CA for AD, so it's our Active Directory environment. We can configure it here for United States of America. Oops, wrong one, but I think you get the idea. Um, United States of America, we can give it a locality name. We'll just say it's Palo Alto. We'll say it's Broadcom. The organization can be VCF and the state can be California. And in just a few moments, we've actually configured an OpenSSL service, all right, as part of VCF operations. Now that's really cool. So what we do after configuring the CA is that we obviously want to replace these VMCA certificates with a signed certificate from the CA server. All right. So the first thing that we do is we come in here and let's just choose, say, the workload domain, for example. I'll clear that previous search. We'll come in here. We'll select ESX, our TLS certificates. We'll hit apply. All right. And we can actually select to generate the certificate signing request in bulk. All right, so I can just basically right click here. We can generate the CSRs. All right, we just have a quick look at what that is. So they look correct. We hit generate and off we go. And this actually commences the workflow, all right, to update all the CSRs. Now, as you can see here, we can come in and, okay, we can see that we're already making progress here, which is good. We can come in and view the running tasks. All right, so this just takes us to our task page. You can see here that some of them are completed and some of them are still running. All right, so we'll go back into certificates. All right, and after we've actually completed the process of updating the CAs, we can then come in and we can then generate, or actually, sorry, replace these certificates with the configured CA certificate. All right, so yeah, doing that in bulk, saves a lot of time. Things don't need to be performed in sequence. We can perform these one at a time. So let's just quickly have a look. So we'll go back in here again. I've just removed my selection. So we'll just go back into the workload domain. So I'll move between screens and we'll select this again. Okay. And we'll see if the option is available now to replace with a configured CA certificate. Yes, it is. All right, so we can do that. We'll kick that off now. We want to select to configure OpenSSL because that's what we've configured in this environment. This is what we're going to update. I hit understand and I hit proceed. All right, so as I mentioned before, so we can see these are running at the top. These certificates have been selected in bulk, but it's really, really important to call out that these certificate operations themselves are actually performed in sequence. So they're performed one at a time. And this is quite deliberate. Sure, being able to perform these operations in bulk saves time, but performing these one at a time in sequence helps to avoid any kind of system instability issues while these retrust operations between all these dependent components are being performed. All right, so you can see that this is still currently running. This will just take a couple of moments. I also mentioned a little bit earlier the option to configure or activate auto renewal. All right, so by configuring auto renewal for a certificate, we're going to ensure that our certificates don't expire. All right, so it prevents any kind of disruption for certificate expiries. And we can configure these at both a management level and at an instance level. All right. And typically, when we go in to configure this auto renewal, the certificates will actually renew 60 days prior to their expiry date. So this is just going to take just a few more seconds. Yep, here we go. So 4 out of the 4 certificates have been replaced successfully. Now, this may take a few minutes to update here. I might just do a quick refresh now, remembering I need to come back down to the workload domain level. We might be in luck. No, not quite yet, but when we come back here a little bit later on, you'll actually see that that these certificates will show as OpenSSL. All right, so let's just go in and look at that auto renewal. All right, so if I select to activate auto renewal, all right, we can see here, just some information about what's about to happen. All right, I can hit confirm, and that will actually configure the auto renewal for the manager components. Same thing at the instance level as well. So we come in at the instance level. We can also activate auto renewal here as well. All right, so this hasn't updated yet. We might come back to this a little bit later on. Now, one other thing I do want to point out as well is the APIs. All right, a lot of our customers are using APIs. If we go into build here and into our developer center, we can actually view our APIs. Now, for VCF 9.1, we introduced the VCF operations APIs for certificate management and password management. So if we go down here, we can just get a quick view of what these are and what they look like. All right, so just wanted to call that out. The VCF operations APIs are very distinctly different to the SCDC manager APIs. So just keep that in mind. We're moving towards the VCF operations APIs. All right, just quickly go back in here. We'll check those certificates, see if we have an update. Not yet, but I assure you they will update later on. All right, so we're going to move forward into password management now. So with VCF 9.x, we introduced a centralized and unified password management capability. It's all managed and maintained now through VCF operations. And this helps to further simplify the process of maintaining a secure private cloud environment. So similar to certificate management, the navigation, the kind of look and feel of password management initially looks quite similar, and the scope is quite similar. All right, so we have our manager components. Once again, we can see the manager components listed here. We have our VCF instances. We can view our passwords at an instance level, or we can come down and view them at a workload domain level. Just as with certificate management as well, we can actually bring in external vCenters, so vCenters that are outside of VCF, into password management. And also if you're running a mixed environment, so VCF 5.2.x and above, excuse me, we can actually bring them in for password management as well. So the process to update a password is pretty easy. So if I wanted to come in here and update my password for vCenter, once again, I can use the filtering capability. I select the vCenter, hit update password, really quite simple. But what I wanted to point out here is a little bit more interesting, are the password requirements. Now, some of you may be aware that, when we look across our different VCF components, they've been configured with different password requirements. So for example, NSX and vCenter have different levels of password complexity, and that's just kind of built in. So what we can do, and we can see this here, so we can see that the existing password requirements for vCenter has been set, okay, and that's a minimum of 12 characters, one lowercase. You can read that here, all right? So 1, 1, 1, and 1 for your character complexity. All right, so what we have that's new to VCF Operations 9.1 are password policies. All right, now I've actually gone in here and I've pre-configured a password policy for us to look at. But this is where things get interesting. So if I just select this and hit edit policy, I can actually come in and we can actually have a look at what I configured. All right, so I configured this policy to have a minimum length of 15 characters. I've changed the number of the requirements for 2 uppercase characters, 2 special characters, and passwords must be changed every 90 days. All right, so that's the policy that I configured. Now, it isn't assigned to anything yet. So once you actually go in and configure that, and it's just a few clicks, you can then come in here and assign the policy. Now, we can assign this policy across the entire fleet if we want to, so across all the different VCF instances, or we can assign it to components. So in this case here, I'm going to assign it just to this instance. All right, so I'll click assign. And as part of the assignment, we look to run a compliance check. Now you can run this now or run it later. I'm going to choose to run it now. All right, and we hit proceed. Now this will just take, this won't take too long. The compliance checks, as you can see, can be run here at any time. So an admin can come in and run a compliance check on a password policy whenever they like. Also of interest too is that compliance checks actually run automatically every 6 hours. And in a typically sized environment, because you do have quite a few components to look at, but a typically sized environment, it usually takes around about 45 minutes to complete. All right, so you can see here, okay, so this compliance check has run and it's come back as not compliant. All right, so what we can do now is by selecting this, we can actually choose to remediate this password policy. All right, so if I hit remediate, this will also take just a few moments to complete. What this will do is that it'll look at all the different components across VCF, and it will apply this uniform password policy across all of your different components. That's something that we haven't had before, so this is a pretty cool tool. Now, while we wait for this to complete, those who have used earlier versions of VCF may have noticed that passwords and certificate management used to be managed from SCDC Manager. And from VCF 9, these functions have all moved into VCF operations. A lot of people ask why. Well, enterprise scale is one big reason. Each VCF instance has its own SCDC manager. All right, so it doesn't really, password management and certificate management didn't really scale beyond a VCF instance. So from VCF 9 and beyond, VCF Ops can manage certificates, passwords, identities, and pretty much everything else that you see here on the screen. And it can do that at a fleet level if we need to. So at an architecture level, we've also centralized all operations to a single console. All right, so it can be used across multiple instances. And what we have announced is the deprecation of SCDC Manager. All right, so SCDC Manager will be removed, or at least access to SCDC Manager from the UI will be removed in a future release. So VCF operations can be used to configure the password policies and update the passwords. And for environments that use CyberArk, from VCF 9.1, customers can now manage the CyberArk VCF password management plugin. All right, so it's a CyberArk plugin built directly on top of VCF password management APIs. Okay, so you can use that to manage, store, and rotate VCF component passwords. All right, so while I was explaining that, we can see here that our password and compliance status has come back as now compliant. So what this means is that when our passwords are next due to renew, they will all adhere to this new password policy. All right, so this brings us to identity and access, which is my last demo for today. So configuring single sign-on and identity and access across your VCF components creates a single standardized authentication plane, and it gives you secure management of your entire private cloud stack. Now, from the admin perspective, you can assign access to specific SSO users and groups and API clients to manage your VCF components. And from a user's perspective, with single sign-on, well, they get the benefit of logging in just once rather than having to log into each component individually. So at a high level here, when you open up identity and access, we have an updated architecture. So we've got this inbuilt identity broker, all right, which connects, and the identity broker connects the VCF components to your corporate identity provider or directory service. And you'll see these in just a moment. We support an extensive set of modern identity providers, directory services, and just-in-time access. And what's also new for VCF operations are VCF roles and custom roles. All right, so and we can assign these roles to users, groups, and API clients. And what they do is that they provide different levels of management access, they have different permissions to the VCF components. And this was something that in the past we had to kind of manage separately. So let's take a look at this. We're going to start, before we actually run the actual workflow, I'm going to start by looking at these VCF roles. And we can see here that we have four inbuilt roles. So the SCDC viewer role, so that's got vCenter and NSX read-only auto access. We have the SCDC administrator role. So once again, vCenter and NSX only, but that's administrator level. We have the VCF viewer role, which is pretty basic, but also covering operations and orchestrator. And we have our most comprehensive role, which is the VCF administrator, which includes vCenter, NSX operations, automation, HCX, and VCF operations orchestrator. All right. Now, in addition to these built-in roles, which we can apply to these users, groups, and API clients, we can also come in and create a custom role. All right. So there may be a few sets of roles that you may not find at a pre-built. So I'm going to create one. I'm going to call it the SCDC operator role. Going to hit next. And what we can do here, we can actually come in and get quite granular with our VCF components. So I can, for example, come in here, give vCenter admin access. I can come into NSX and give, say, network operator access. I could skip automation. I could come into operations and say, let's just choose power user. All right. I'll hit next. I'll hit create. And then we've created a new custom role, which we can also use. All right, and we'll see this in the next workflow. All right, so VCF operations, it includes a built-in set of workflows to configure identity and access with SSO. And this workflow has seen many enhancements over time. It now includes SSO end-to-end, so it configures SSO completely for you end-to-end, which includes the ability to assign VCF roles and the custom roles, which I just spoke about. And it does this all within the workflow. So there's basically there's little to nothing that you need to do after the workflow is completed. This will completely integrate secure access with your own identity provider. All right, now what I've done, I have cheated a little bit here again, just to save some time. I have already pre-configured SSO, but there is an option when you configure SSO to reset it, and it will actually remove it. So I've actually pre-configured it, I've reset it, which has removed it, but it just gives me the option of being able to select all the prior selections, which saves me from having to fat finger things in. All right, so when we go to configure it, there are a number of prerequisites here. Um, Notable something to keep in mind is that enhanced link mode. Okay, so we need to disable enhanced link mode if you're using this with VCF 9. All right, so take a look at the documentation for that. But to get started, we basically click on the button here to configure SSO. Now, by hitting start, we can look at our deployment mode options. Now, here we're talking about the identity broker. All right, so a multi-node instance configures the identity broker as a HA cluster of 3 VMs. All right, and this is the recommended approach. For more info, we can click on here, for example. This will actually take us to the tech docs page. You'll probably notice there are lots of little links in VCF operations. We've been adding these over time to help make things easier to use. All right, so we recommend using instance mode. Embedded mode is just, it kind of embeds a single node into the management domain vCenter here. This is really only useful for proof of concept environments, not suitable for production, and we will be deprecating this in a future release. All right, so we're going to do things properly here. We're going to select instance mode. This is our identity broker. Now you can see here it's already configured with an FQDN. And the reason why is that as part of the deployment or an upgrade, all right, you may notice in Kyle's session that you had to actually enter in an FQDN for the identity broker. So what it does, it installs the identity broker, but it hasn't yet configured it. So here we're actually going to start configuring it. So let's hit configure. And this will just take a quick moment. And I'm looking at the time, and I think we're doing well for time. We select our identity provider. So as I mentioned, we support a number of different identity provider types. The modern types like Okta and Entra ID, ADFS is a favorite. We have SAML 2.0, OIDC, and for many customers, AD is probably the approach. And that's what I'm going to use here. All right, so I'm going to hit to configure this, and we get to enter in a display name. And you can see these are all the prior options that I use. So it saves me fat fingering things. So I'm just going to call this AD for VCF. I'm going to configure our primary domain controller. That's going to use port 389. Ideally, you'd want to use a secure connection. We're using the SAM account name as a directory search attribute. The base DN, so the distinguished name details are in here, and our bind username. So this is the CN name. Okay, here it is. And our bind user password. I'm going to have to re-enter that. All right. We hit validate and next. And what this is doing, it's going to validate this with the existing Active Directory, and that's come back, which is great. All right. That's just a quick review of what we've selected. And here, we're now actually going to start to configure our user and group provisioning. All right, so we'll just have a quick review of this. So that looks okay. Here are our attribute mappings that it's using with Active Directory. So I'll just add this one in here as well. That completes that. our group provisioning. So here we're going to add in particular, or we're going to configure the SSO for a particular group. I'm going to hit the sync button. All right, so which one was it? It was that one or that one? It was that one because I've made a mistake. All right, we hit add the base DN. We're going to select a particular OU, so it's our lab demo users OU, all right, as the group. We hit next. We have the option of also being able to configure user provisioning as well directly. Now, this is an option. Generally, you would configure this as a group. All right, so we hit next on that. All right, so you can see here we've got one group selected. Actually, I just missed something there. So we hit select. If I wanted to add in users directly, I can add in Mary and Jason here, for example, and I can actually add them in directly. All right, so one group, two users. Here's a quick summary. We hit finish. All right, and in just a few moments, this workflow will then take us to the next step where we actually get to actually test a login, all right, which is pretty cool. This is also another new feature. So by hitting the test login button, I can come in here and I can enter Mary's credentials because she was a user that we just added. So Mary at ad.vcf.lab, and hopefully I get the right password here. And it's kind of locked for some reason. Here we go. And good. All right. So that has worked successfully, which is great. So I can close that. I hit done, and we're on to the final set of steps. All right. So here we've actually configured the identity provider. We've configured the groups. We've configured the users. Now we need to enable SSO for our VCF components. So this example environment has two domains. We have a vCenter and NSX for each domain. So we're going to select all of those. Hit finish there, and it's going to configure SSO for those components. All right. While we wait for that to complete, we have this last step, which is optional, but I definitely recommend it. And this is where we actually get to use those VCF roles. All right. So I'm going to select the group here. This is the lab demo user group. I'm going to hit assign. And this is where we assign our roles. Now we can assign these roles across the identity broker, and you can have multiple identity brokers in a fleet. All right, so it's not completely fleet level, but in many customers examples it probably would be. So we can figure these at a fleet level in this example. We select the role. Now we can see this cool SCDC operator role that we created earlier. All right, so that's in there. But in this case, we're going to give it everything that we have. We'll give it VCF admin. We hit apply. We can select an expiry. All right. So we can come in here, select a date. All right. To make it easier, I'm just going to hit never expires, hit apply, and hit assign. All right. And what we're doing there, that's group level. If we wanted to come in and directly configure users, we can do that. Depends on whether you want to do that. Select the users, once again, Mary and Jason. We hit assign. We can give it a different level of permission. So just say Mary and Jason manage just one instance. So they manage instance A, for example. We can just give them access to instance A instead of the entire fleet. We come in here, we select a role, okay? We have a subset of roles because of what we just selected, because Jason and Mary are just looking after that instance. And these other components, are not valid in this case. So here we're going to assign SCDC administrator. We'll leave it to never expire, and we hit assign. All right. This won't take long. We can quickly view what we've done here. We hit done. And we're finished. All right. This is the reset button that I was talking about before, so we can come back and reconfigure it if we need to. Now, we're not quite done, actually. There are a few other things that we can do. We can export the configuration, which is handy for backup purposes, or if we want to use it somewhere else. Um, or we can also configure another identity broker, and we can also configure another identity provider as well. So let's just have a quick look. Before we do that though, we did enter in vCenter and NSX for SSO. We do need to add in our remaining components. So I'm adding in the automation appliance and the operation appliance. We're going to add those. We're adding those to the identity, to this particular identity broker. We hit join, we hit finish. And lastly, if we wanted to, if there are other components that we want to add, so other components in the VCF environment, such as these that we see here, we can add them in here directly. All right, so let's just have a quick look at what we've done. All right, so we can see our instance A. This is our identity broker, our identity source, which is Active Directory. Okay, so we can see that here. We can do test logins. We can add more if we want to. We can look at our different components that we've configured across different instances as well. Our access management. So here are the groups and users and the VCF roles that we've assigned. And here, last but definitely not least, this is where we configure our API access. All right, so we can create a new API client here, for example. All right, so we'll just hit cancel on that. So we're running short on time. And we can also generate our API tokens for the clients here as well. All right, so that's that pretty much concludes my fleet management demo, specifically certificates, passwords, and identity management. Three of the core functions which are configured post-deployment to operationalize your environment prior to putting VCF into production.
All right, thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to the attendees for sticking with us. We know this is a lot. It's like drinking from a fire hose, but as you can see, there's a lot in VCF operations. It's a lot to cover. So my ask to you is when you get your surveys, if there's other areas where you'd like to deep dive more, be it costing, capacity planning, or maybe SSO or certificates, give us that feedback. We can host more sessions where we can allocate more time and do a more focused presentation on any specific areas. So just a reminder to those who want to enter our giveaway. If you do enter all 5 webinars, and again, next week is our final webinar of this initial 5, you can enter this drawing to get the giveaways. And as was mentioned a couple times, we do have our VM Explorer event coming up here the last week of August, first week of September. If you're going to be there, look us up. We'll have sessions. We'll be able to deep dive into more information, and we hope to see as many of you there as we can. And so again, today we spent some time going over VCF operations, and then next week, August 12th, we'll wrap up our initial session in the last session in our initial VCF adoption series, where we'll deep dive into VCF automation. So again, thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for your time, and remember, these will all be available in recorded format and posted shortly after. Thank you very much.